These are the immigration photos of our grandparents, dated 1917 and 1918. Our grandfather, Eng Tenbo, was 34 when he heard of a young Chinese woman of marriageable age in Montreal. This was extremely rare. Due to targeted immigration laws, the ratio of Chinese men to women in North America was 25-1. He liked that she was Southern Chinese like himself, and because she was a Canadian citizen, there'd be no restrictions to cross the border back to America. On December 17, 1917, his application was approved to enter Canada and retrieve his bride. They married in a church in Montreal on January 12, 1918. His bride, Wong Tu Lan, is our grandmother. She's just 17 here. 10 years earlier, in 1907, 6-year-old Wong Tu Lan was gathering mulberry leaves to feed the family's silkworm when a stranger approached her parents with an offer. He offered her a better life with a wealthy, childless family. Driven by family and desperation and the promise of an education, the family relinquished her. Our grandmother was adopted by a wealthy Chinese-Canadian family and taken to live in Montreal. The promise, however, was short-lived. Following the birth of the family's 4 biological children, our grandmother was sidelined. At the age of 17, her circumstances changed once more, this time towards freedom. This is one of my favorite photographs of our grandmother. It shows a woman older than 17 years, having been harshly treated and betrayed. But in her eyes, there's a hint of softness, and on her lips, an almost repressed smile, cautiously bringing to the surface a hope buried long ago. Look closely at this rare photograph. My grandparents, returning Chinese Americans, stand proudly before their 7-story diaolu in our ancestral village of Taishan. Behind these walls lies a story of hardship and opportunity seized, built from our family's grueling labor in the laundry business and the sacrifice of my grandmother's childhood as an indentured maid. Look closer and observe the faces of those who defied a Chinaman's chance in the West. My grandmother, Wong Tun, sits cradling her young son, Toy. Her eyes radiate a hard-earned dignity. My grandfather, Eng Tenbo, stands with stately composure, his set jaw speaking of quiet resilience. Below them, my father, George, just 2 years old, sitting astride a Western-style pedal car, surrounded by his siblings. If you look up onto the 4th-floor balcony, the swallow's nest, a guardsman stands ready with a rifle. This striking contrast, our growing family under armed protection, perfectly echoes the complex transnational lives my grandparents led. The Japanese occupation shattered this bucolic period. In 1938, when news of the Nanking massacre reached the South, my grandfather was forced to abandon his dream. Only 9 years after settling in Taishan, our family fled back to America, this time Jackson Heights, New York. Today, nearly a century later, our abandoned diaolu still stands as a monument to our dual heritage. Like an elegant chess piece left on the board, it embodies both sacrifice and accomplishments of my grandparents, which enabled my father George to forge his own path to success. While the family home still stands in China, it remains a powerful symbol of a family that navigated the turbulent tides of history.
The neighborhood was always important to my father. It didn't matter if it was the mixed Queens neighborhood that he grew up in, playing with the Italian, German, and Jewish kids, or the good neighbors that became his customers and friends at his restaurant. Dad was a man of many neighborhoods. From his boyhood village in China, the mom-and-pop Main Street his business was on for 45 years, or the middle-class town he chose for his kids to grow up in, or even the tranquil potato fields of Bridgehampton, where he engendered his final home. He taught us to venerate our homes and respect our neighbors wherever we may be. He always told me that we had to cultivate the dynasty with each generation and never to stagnate. True vision and foresight from a very wise man. As Chinese Americans, my dad's family embraced assimilation to this country. He and his brothers proudly served the U.S. military separately from the 1940s through the 1950s. During the Korean War, from 1951 to 1953, Staff Sergeant Bo was stationed in West Germany as part of the U.S.-led UN coalition forces defending against the threat of a Soviet-backed East Germany invasion. My father's experiences in the military provided him an invaluable and important education. He learned to train with, work with, and supervise fellow soldiers from vast backgrounds from different small towns and big cities in the U.S. He learned much from these men. He took everything he gleaned from these interactions home with him and applied it to his future personal and professional relationships. My dad believed in order and groundwork, and I remember he frequently suggested the words regimented and gold brick when dealing with me as a teenager. When he was discharged from the Army, my dad attempted to use the GI Bill to take advantage of some courses in college. Before his first set of finals, his family told him they needed him back at the restaurant. College was over for young George, but he certainly had aspirations for his future children.
This 1931 engagement portrait from Taishan captures a profound shift in Chinese society, driven by a father's devotion to his only daughter, Chan Lai-jin. As China descended into chaos due to a perfect storm of famine, Japanese occupation of Manchuria, and the beginnings of a civil war, he had to make a radical choice. Decades earlier, a marriage between an educated young woman from Canton, the cosmopolitan capital of Guangdong province, and a Taishan son from the agricultural hinterlands was unthinkable. Yet, seeking a lifeline, he looked to the prospects of a Gold Mountain son. David P. Luke immigrated to Seattle at age 11, and at age 19, he returned to China to choose a bride before returning to America. Their contrast is striking. Here he is seated with Western confidence, dapper in his three-piece suit with slick-back hair and his arm draped casually over her shoulder. Our grandmother is elegantly dressed in a traditional cheongsam, staring out beneath her fringe with youthful innocence, her hands clutching a handkerchief, her ankles modestly crossed. In this one frame live Western modernism and Canton elegance. This union would last 60 years, leading ultimately to a two-family house in Queens, where they lived right upstairs from us for nearly 30 years. He died of a heart attack in 1991, and his wife, Lai Jin, died 2 weeks later of a broken heart. Seven years later, the youthful innocence of the engagement portrait is gone. By 1938, our grandmother faced the harsh reality of being a Gold Mountain wife, her husband working in America, leaving her a living widow in rural Taishan. Though our grandfather was an American citizen, the 1924 Immigration Act strictly excluded Chinese wives. Her survival relied entirely on his family and the monetary remittances he sent from abroad, called silver letters, for basic subsistence. Isolated in rural Taishan, in a household of women, she was under the rule of her formidable mother-in-law, who wielded absolute domestic power. Constantly scrutinized, our grandmother was bitterly criticized for eating too much or working too slowly. Her education and social standing meant nothing. Her firstborn was merely a daughter, not a prize son. The little girl standing beside her is our mother, Vivian. At 5 years old, Vivian's hair is completely shorn to protect her from the horrors of occupying soldiers. Besides her, our grandmother wears a plain black cheongsam, her hair cut into a modern bob, perhaps a quiet defiance against Taishan traditional customs. She refuses to look at the lens, her gaze askance. Looking closely at this picture, the mirrored body language of mother and daughter, each with a bent elbow leaning towards the other, speaks of an enduring partnership. Their expression, while solemn, reveal they have already seen horrors of war and achieved a small triumph of survival. They knew not, however, what greater trials lay ahead.
People say that you learn everything you need to know in kindergarten. While true on a basic level, my maternal grandmother, Lai Jean Luke, showed me that life could be both abundant and beautiful, and that I had the ability within myself to make it so. Lai Jean married at 18. Her daughter Vivian quickly followed. Her husband left shortly for America to make a better life for them. That separation would last nearly 15 years. With the advent of World War II, communication ceased, as did the money he sent home. It was a dire time. Enemy soldiers plundered the countryside, ravaging neighbors and friends. Dressed as two young boys for safety, their faces smeared with soot, mother and daughter fled for the relative safety of Canton. Here, Lai Jean warded off starvation by toiling in the factories. After rejoining her husband in America, she continued to labor for the betterment of her family in the sweatshops of Chinatown. Eventually, she and my grandfather saved enough for a restaurant. Always chicly dressed, and despite her imperfect English, she charmed and befriended their patrons. I have so many wonderful memories of her, guiding my early efforts at her treasured singer-song machine, patiently decoding butterick patterns, a lush corduroy fabric from Macy's just for me, the little celebrations we had at Tad Steaks, our mutual delight in the automat, the smell of ripe tomatoes and the perfume of roses, her secret, shrimp shells and eggshells dug deeply into the soil, beauty from what would have been discarded. In her latter years, Lai Jean would raise a glass to welcome each new year. As she watched us devour the special dishes she had prepared, I saw in her eyes still perennial hope and fierce resilience, gratitude for the rich life she had wrested from destiny.
The radiant smile that you see on my mother's 19-year-old face masks layers of childhood trauma. My mom, born Luk Buijing, came of age in southern China during the tumultuous 1930s and 40s. Civil war and the Japanese occupation of China raged. Born a girl in China carries many shades of sorrow, and living in poverty during wartime just amplified this suffering. By the tender age of 14, my mother had already watched helplessly as her grandmother starved to death and was then robbed of her family's belongings by neighbors the very next day. She had already lived in fear of sexual assault and violence under Japanese occupation, dressing as a boy to avoid being noticed. She had already had her right to immigrate to the U.S. taken away after her father sold her immigration papers to a male relative, and she had already held deep feelings of abandonment after her parents left for the U.S. without her when World War II ended. While these painful memories colored my mother's view on life, they would also be a source of strength and resilience. Having survived all of this, she was, by all accounts, tough, tenacious, and resourceful. I love this photo of my mom because it shows her sitting in the middle of Central Park, having recently migrated to the U.S. and having come out on the other side of her tragic early years. She has a buoyant sense of lightness. I imagine that she's looking to the future with hopefulness on what her new life in America will bring.
Seeing my dad work the room at the Dragon Seed restaurant on a bustling Saturday night always made me beam with pride. He was the man and he knew it. Boisterous, welcoming, and friendly, he greeted all his guests with a great big smile. They, in turn, feeling like family, felt elated and at home with the host they knew who was about to provide them with their weekly sumptuous Chinese banquet. Making the rounds in his opulent Mandarin jacket, my dad was what made the Dragon Seed the Dragon Seed. He always gave credit to the classic movie Casablanca for romanticizing restaurants, and he felt his Chinese-Polynesian establishment deserved the same stage. Although the restaurant closed up over 30 years ago, former patrons still waxed poetic over Dad's store, as he used to call it. The restaurant was his pride and joy. He grew up there on that corner, served his community, made thousands of friends, and gave people an experience that they continue to carry with them to this day.
This is one of my favorite photographs of Dad. It is the 1970s, and he is standing in the field on which our home would be built. You can see his wistfulness and innocence while he considers what this can become. He is also showing us his hope and vision. Already, he is literally gazing at the horizon and thinking of what he'd like for his family. Unity, love, endless sky, and the sweet farm air. This is Cynthia, daughter number 2, he would affectionately call me. This photograph captures so much of who George is. He is wonderstruck. He is looking forward, and he is already devising a way to get there.